Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today, we are going to be talking to Carla Marie Manly about her book, Aging Joyfully. Carla is a psychologist, and she provides important and meaningful window into womanhood and for those approaching 50 and beyond. And so I'm right in your target audience. So welcome.
Thank you for having me, CJ. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this ever since I hit 50, this kind of time
Mm.
period, because what I notice about myself is that at age 50, somehow, like all the kinds of things that I worried about, like, what are they going to think of me? What are my, all those kinds of things just started to fade away. What happens when we get to that? Like, for me, it was age 50, but is there something that happens at age 50? Why you mark age 50 in this book?
The reason I marked age 50 was actually a publisher's issue. I wanted it, they first wanted 60, I wanted 40, and we settled on 50. And here's why. Because in our very youth-oriented culture, CJ, women in my practice, right, I'm finding women in their 20s afraid of aging. They are, and this fear of not being relevant anymore. The big
Mm,
buzzword I hear a lot is, I don't want to not be relevant anymore. So
mm,
for me, where we really seem to hit that is in our 30s and 40s.
mm,
And it's really interesting because I'm watching the stats on my book, and there's a spike at 50. I'm sorry, at 35. There's a
mm,
spike at 45, and then there's a big spike at 55. And
mm,
that's really telling you the demographic that I was dead on when I thought that 40 would have been a really, because depending upon when we had children, if we had children, and this is, me having been a mother, I am a mother of two, right?
mm,
That it's those times, and in working with clients, both men and women, but you see predominantly with women because we're the good caregivers and nurturers, it is as our responsibilities and our role of mother tends to go by the wayside. So that's where the age part comes in. And a lot of women find a reduced sense of responsibility in their 40s. And as that responsibility, because the kids are older and they don't need mom as much anymore. And
mm,
so mom starts suffering because mom has
mm,
put so much energy into raising the children, taking care of the family, even if she's working outside the home full time, right?
mm,
Then, so to me, it's more about like the timing is, when does your soul finally have the space? I liken it to this, being out in the middle of a pond or an ocean where there are little
mhm,
sharks swimming around, right?
mhm,
And there's mama with the inner tube struggling to keep everybody safe, and and then all
mm,
of a sudden all the little babies, however many there are safe on their island or safe up in the sky wherever they went. And mom's going, oh, wait a second, now what do I do?
right,
I've been here struggling to keep everything afloat. And
right,
now I have, who am I? What am
mm,
I?
mhm,
And you and I were talking before a little bit, and you used the beautiful word, which is beautiful yet very poignant, of being in a place of self-sacrifice.
mhm,
And that is what many women, or I was raised to
mhm,
be,
mhm,
a woman of great sacrifice, not a martyr, but, there's a difference there.
right,
And so when we get to that place where all of a sudden we have the time and the spaciousness to
mm,
evaluate it, it's no wonder that we go through, and I really believe this, that many women, that empty nesting is often about grief.
mm. Well, because their grief, it's interesting because I'm having a different experience with my second. So I have two sons, one who left 2 years ago, and another one that we just shipped off 2 weeks ago.
Ah.
And it's interesting. The experience that I had with the first was actually harder than my experience with the second. And maybe I don't know if I'm in denial or what, but which could be a possibility too. But for the first one, I just felt empty. Like I just felt like my whole inners was hollowed out, and it's an empty as in not like this beautiful empty, full empty, empty as in sad empty. And like nothingness, scary, fearful emptiness. Um, and I know from all my spiritual work that it can be seen as fullness, fullness in everything or nothing. Like I get it, but just honestly, it just felt like I was like a hollowed out core, a shell with a form. And so, I thought a lot of times like, what is this? And it's the loss of structure. So how we sat at the dinner table was different. There is a loss of relationship because I was so close to my eldest son. I'm also close to my second son. One is a talking relationship, the other one's more of a physical hugging relationship. But it's like a loss and the missing of that person. And then there's a loss of dynamics because whenever one person leaves, it changes the whole dynamics of the people remaining. And so when my eldest son left, the house was really quiet, like library quiet, and it was weird to have
Mm,
it be that quiet. And then there was also a two against two, kind of loud, two loud people on one, and then two quiet people. And so when my eldest son left, it changed the kind of the sound levels in the house. And I was
mm-hmm.
like the loud one, and now I was like outvoted 2-1. Do you know what I mean?
Ah,
So
yes.
then there's like routines, like just how do we do things now that we're three versus a two? Like just like we go to a restaurant, I'm like table four, and they're like, I mean three, and now I'm gonna be like, no, two. So there's all these changes that happen, and so what did you find in when you talk to women? What are the things that cause that sadness or grief?
Before I answer that, I'll ask you a question.
Yeah,
Which, the oldest son, was he the talker or the hugger?
the talker.
He was the talker. And is your husband a big talker?
He is. He's not a big talker, but we talk a lot.
Okay. And the nature of the talking is different between husband and you and talking son and you in
Yes.
what way?
My husband and I talk about our spiritual practice and like day in day out logistics and a different content. Like my younger son would always be like asking about life and the meaning of life and the purpose. So he was my anchor to focusing on meaning. Like, what is the meaning of all this, mom? And I'd have to think like sometimes I'm like, I don't know. Let me get back to you. But he was the step back and look at what's happening and give me
Yes.
advice from a higher perspective versus just like, go do your college apps, go do this. You should go do, select soccer, whatever it was. Um, my husband and I would always kind of take a Uber look anyways, but he always challenged us to think through things logically and clearly.
And so when you look at it from that perspective, right,
Hmm.
you realize that it's not that you favor one son over the other, but when you have a husband where he's your conversationalist in life's
Hmm.
pragmatic sense, but also in spiritual sense. But
Hmm.
then you had this person that was almost like a soulmate on
Yeah.
some level,
Yeah.
or a soul, evolution partner.
Yeah.
So when we look at a child leaving for college, and that's why the abruptness of the shift can leave you feeling empty in a truly empty way.
Mm.
Not empty in that full way that we sometimes know, but empty in that sense of deep, deep loss that
Mm.
cannot be replaced
Mm.
because you can't have a conversation like that with yourself.
Right.
It's
Ah.
irreplaceable. You
Mm.
can't have that conversation with your husband because husband does it in a different way.
Hmm.
Can't have it in the conversation with the younger son because the younger son is the hugger and the physical one.
Yeah.
So you actually ache. It's that void
Ah.
that cannot be filled. Not by a
Yeah.
girlfriend, not by food, not
Mm.
by, it
Mm.
just, so that's what, when we look at the empty nest part, um, we really want to be able to see it as what is the meaning of this? Have I lost something that I really can't fill from elsewhere?
Ah.
And
I see.
honoring that.
Yes. Yes. So someone
And
wrote them. We are not really empty, but we see it this way. I think. Yeah. I think we are empty. I actually, what I think you said is that you feel empty because it is irreplaceable.
absolutely, and that's the part where I like to differentiate between a sense of being empty because you're longing or missing,
Right.
and a sense of, wait a second, that piece of the puzzle is missing. And you
Mm,
have that, and there's nothing that can take the place. So, of course, that space is empty.
right.
That space is empty. Now we can fill it with Play-Doh,
Right.
right? Or something, but it will not be what that puzzle piece was.
Mm,
And there's an honoring in that. It doesn't mean that we are less than, but it does mean there is that void. And why do we have to fill that void?
right.
And that's part of what the empty nest process is about, is noticing. There's a lot of people who say, okay, there's a rush, go find new friends, new clothes, new this, new that. You can do some of that, but there's also the honoring that this beautiful being that was part of my life will likely, it will never be that way again. I will not
Mm,
have that constant companion.
mm-hmm.
Yes, he'll come home on breaks, but we know in a very, very deep level that once that child leaves the nest, we will never have that back again the way it was. We
Yeah.
might get it back differently, but son is likely to end up in Tokyo or New York or LA or
Right.
wherever it is. So we know that it will never be that intimate, that
Mm, mm.
constantly intimate again. And so we grieve.
Yeah, I see. So, I want to go back to something that you said because there are a couple questions from listeners asking about, do we look for things to replace the void space? I'm hearing you say like it's irreplaceable, so you can't. I'm not going to be able to replace that aspect with my son. And some people do, like they try to put, like you said, Play-Doh. Like I'm going to get busy and do lots of different things. Jim also wrote, "Is it about filling time with other things?" And then Ralph said, "Do you find men have these same issues?" So these are the questions that we're getting.
Great questions. Um, so I think that, like any loss, grief has this, grief after a loss is important to honor. And
Mm-hmm.
in our culture, we tend to not honor grief.
Mm,
We are told, get over it, get through it, get beyond it, just go.
mm-hmm.
Instead, I'm a real advocate of knowing the stages of grief, or denial, anger,
Mm-hmm.
bargaining, depression. And then eventually, they're not linear. We come to a place of acceptance,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm.
But really going into that place of knowing what you're grieving,
Mm-hmm.
knowing what it's about, honoring it, honoring the beauty of that relationship that will never be quite the same again. And in that way, we honor the self and we honor the beautiful child who has moved on.
Yeah. So
So,
honoring the beauty of the relationship and like what that person, and it's funny because we were talking earlier, I'm going to be going on the El Camino, and one of the things I wanted to do was just have a period of family and thinking about a celebratory piece of it, like, hey, I'm done, with the good heavy lifting of it, I'm done. And part of it was also just like really being grateful because and I almost cried, but both of my kids have given me so much. Like I've grown so
yes,
much as a person and to just be grateful. But I think also it's like in grieving, like that is no longer like it is literally a period of time and it's ended.
absolutely. And knowing as you're getting these tears that both can exist, they're not exclusive. They're not
Yeah.
mutually exclusive. We can be so grateful for the gifts that
Mm-hmm.
parenting gives us and nurturing these beautiful beings gives to us. And we can also be very sad that that role is done. That
Mm-hmm.
period of life is done. We can be grateful also that it's done because we have more freedom, but we can also say, wow, that was a beautiful period of my life. I've nurtured, I've grown, I've been other oriented, and now I get to focus more on me, which is scary for some people. So for the listener who said, do men feel this? It's such a great question because the emphasis is largely on women as empty
Mm-hmm.
nesters. And I really think it depends on the person in the family. Unfortunately, in our culture, men are not given the modeling as youngsters and as adults that it's okay to feel to really feel deeply and feel joy and sorrow and to feel grief. And so even as their children move on, A, they may not have developed a really close relationship with their children, and B, if even if they have, they may not feel like it's acceptable to really state how they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
and feel how they're feeling. And I'm
Mm.
a big advocate on shifting this paradigm and allowing men to really have their range of emotions in a beautifully tempered way, as I encourage women to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that men may very much, particularly with daughters, sometimes dads, have a really hard time, but, they have to toughen up and send the child off. But instead, they too, especially if they've had close relationships with their children, they can feel really devastated and grieve
Mm.
just as much as a woman. Now, that said, here's a difference. If a woman has been a stay-at-home mom, one of the
Mm-hmm.
beautiful professions on the planet that I really honor, um, then her focus, her depth of loss may be different because it will include a role change and a
Right.
physical loss of space in her home environment that she might have been used to nearly 24/7.
Right.
Whereas if the dad has been working away from home, he's been largely absent for, 8, 10 hours a day, 5, 6, 7 days a week. So he might not feel as impacted.
Mm.
And whereas a woman will generally, whether she's worked at home full time or part time or, whatever, she may really feel that loss on many levels that a man might not experience,
Yeah,
or
I
a
like
woman
the
who's, yeah.
differences. Yeah, I think the differences that you're pointing out are really important. Women, stay-at-home
Mhm.
women, women who work, men, and it's all different. And we actually, as you were talking, Bunny and Renee had some more questions. So Bunny had asked about what about single fathers or single mothers, and then Renee asked about what about same-sex marriages? Do you find the same issues in one partner or the other?
Again, it's whether it's a same-sex marriage or a, same-sex marriage, it's again more about the connection to the child.
Right, you mean the
And
specific, like, so I had a connection where I spoke about meaning with my son. Like
mhm,
my husband who, I have a hugging relationship and of my love languages, physical affection is like probably very low. Even though I've always like hugged and am very affectionate with my children, the way that I receive love, the physical affection is very low on my queue,
mm,
but quality time is very high. So I think as a result, the absence of my first son was harder because that was like the way I felt love, and the second,
mhm,
and my husband gives me hugs every day, so I don't I'm not going to feel the loss as
mhm.
much. So I think so it's like depends on the relationship of your with your child. It depends on how that if that relationship can be filled with other people in your lives, right? Because
Right. So for same-sex, parents, it's not really about the gender.
yeah,
It's about the
relationship,
connection to the child, the
yeah,
relationship to that child. And there is also a part of it that is about the relationship with one's partner.
right,
Because the healthiest parenting is when, the a parenting, where you have the parents connected and then really feeling aligned with each other. That if you have parents who are disconnected and one was really closely aligned with the child and the other
uh,
one was disconnected, this parent over here that was really closely aligned with the child is going to feel an incredible loss because that parent, male or female, will have really suffered a loss of their significant other.
oh, wow.
Yes.
So that's
So
kind of
yeah,
akin to the single father or single mother. Like, is that the same?
not necessarily, because this dynamic is generally very unhealthy, right?
Okay.
Whereas a single mom, and does that make sense? We
Yes.
don't really
Yeah,
want,
like
it's
all of a
not
sudden you were kind of sort of married and having your significant partner be your child, and when they leave, it's like
right.
now I'm married, and this child filled this need that I had, but now that they're gone, I'm looking at my husband or wife or and saying, yeah,
Who are you? What are
does
you
not
doing here?
work. What are you
Don't
gonna
like,
do for me,
yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Okay, I
And
get that.
okay, so then the question about the single parent, a single parent can have an extremely healthy relationship with their children, also extremely unhealthy, depends on what's going on in the home. So and a single parent who's really been striving to make ends meet or do their
Mm,
best, they
mm-hmm,
may feel, depending again on the relationship, they may feel a sense of relief. They also may feel a sense of loss.
mm,
Again, we go back to relationship. What
mm.
was the relationship like with that child?
Right. Yeah, because we ran when we went to the parent orientation when we were dropping off my youngest son. Both of my husband and I are just weepy. We're just like, oh. And there was another parent that said, "Thank God she's gone. She has been like a hellion the last month, like this whole last year. You were just like, please go." You're like a negative energy vortex in our house. Please just leave. I mean, they literally had this like relief. So, and it kind of
Yes.
depends on I get what you're saying about the relationship that you
Yeah.
had with your kid and the loss. But there are all these other like minor losses that each time it happens, like I was saying to you earlier, like, how we sit is different, how our organizational structure is different. Even now that we're empty nesters, it feels like our value, like my husband and I were, this is kind of a stupid example, but my husband and I were doing shopping for my son and his college planning. And so this is like we're coming into the final stages of me generally being the CEO of the household and like running things my way because he was mostly at work, the other times in the beginning of our marriage. And so now he works at home. But I'm kind of the doer of the family, so I had to do it, and I did it my way because I was carrying the lion's share of stuff. And as my son left, I started doing things, and he's like, "Well, that's not how I want to do it." And I was like, "Who cares how you want to do it?" In the back of my head, I didn't say that out loud, but in my head, I'm like, "Who cares? If you're going to do the work, then like fine. But if you're not going to do the work, then you have no say." This is what happened in the back of my head. But then when we got into these little mini explosive fights, right, because of the tension of your child leaving,
Mhm.
and then also what we realized is like, wait a second, like this is how we work as a family, but now that my son is gone, like how are you and I going to work these through? Because the
Yes.
dynamics and you carrying the burden of all this stuff is no longer happening. So why do you get to always run the show and do things your way? And when honestly, I inherently understand that my way is not necessarily even better. It's just my way, and it's easier for me. But it was interesting. Like, wow, I said, I think we're going to have to like, when the kids were born, we put together our cultural values.
Mhm.
Like, what are our values and what do they mean? And how are you going to raise our family under these values so the kids have a consistent, aligned framework, like you were saying, on how to raise
Mhm.
the kids? And then I said, when we were going on a really long walk, and I said, I think we need to figure out what our values are as a couple. And like I said, I don't know. Like, I think we need to think about that. Like, should it be intimate? Like, I think for me, it would be intimacy and it would be about transparency. And I don't know what the new values are, but they're different than the values that we had when we were just partnership values are very different than a
Mhm.
team where you have four people on a team. But have you found that? I mean, what do people? Where do you see that in when you are married? What things kind of shift in the marriage?
I think that what really happens is, we have these different life stages depending
Hmm.
upon, when somebody gets married. So you get together, you generally, let's hope, take a look at your values at that
Hmm.
point in time about what you want, what your goals are. Then when kids and work take over, even if kids aren't a part of it, but we're talking empty nest, so kids are a part of it. And then you have this stretch of 15, 20 years that's
Right.
in it's invested in accruing of finances.
Hmm.
Why? Because we have to be able to have money to raise the kids. Career, which gives us, a sense of self and family and all of these things. So it's this vortex
Mm.
for, 15, 20 years.
Mm.
And then in that, often the relationship between the two partners,
Hmm.
whatever the genders are, the
Hmm.
relationship can get lost
Mm.
simply because life gets busy and chaotic.
Right.
And one of the things I run into really commonly in my practice is that people forget, and they'll really tell me they're so proud. They're coming in with a broken marriage and they're saying, I've put my kids ahead of everything
Right.
these last 18 years. And one or the other partner's sitting there going, yeah, I can feel it. I've been lost
Yeah,
in the
no
dust,
kidding.
right? So
Yes.
here the parents thinking they're doing the right thing by putting the children at the apex, right? When
Right.
really it's the relationship, and we're not taught this in many
Mm.
cases, that
Mm-hmm.
the relationship is the primary factor. If
Mm-hmm.
the relationship's not healthy, the kids are going to be given really odd messages that aren't going to help them grow up really whole
Mm-hmm.
and find whole partners, right? So, assuming that we have a relationship that's generally healthy, then the transition into empty nest arena is generally easier. However,
Mm.
if, as happens in many cases, and it's not a conscious decision, people don't intend to destroy their marriages as they're raising their children, usually, but sometimes they've lost each other, and the
Yeah.
husband and wife are looking at each other. And I talk about relationships like this, that you can have relationships where people are pretty parallel,
Yeah.
just moving
It's like
along like
parallel
this.
play when they're babies. They're just.
Yes, right. Well, and in this case, but they're not intersecting. You can have divergent, where one
Oh
person's going
wow.
this way, the other person's going that way.
Yeah.
You can have really enmeshed, where they're just like nothing is done or said without, the other one doing it. Or you can have the healthy parenting, healthy relationship, which was apart together, apart together, apart together, but constantly reconnecting, right?
Mm.
And so if that's happened as the children were growing, then it's going to be the behavior that's hardwired in, yeah?
Yes.
But if it hasn't been that way, or there's been a lot of turmoil that's either been percolating, or arguments that have not been percolating but have been exploding, then when the children are gone, all of that stuff is there. It's just going to be
Mm.
sitting there waiting.
Oh,
And so that's,
oh
I know,
wow.
it's, I see all levels of it. And so that's when it's really time for couples. And I talk about this in Aging Joyfully, CJ, where there's that really honest reevaluation for both partners, the woman and the man, about, wait a second, empty in this sense is a really wonderful thing,
Mm-hmm.
because empty nest means, hey, babe, it's yours and mine to figure out
Mm-hmm.
what we want to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want this nest? Are we going to have to create two new nests because we don't like each other and we don't get along? What? And that's what, I think you're saying as well. You have this full space of potential,
Mm-hmm.
this whole nest where you get to really start looking inside and
Mm-hmm.
talking to your partner, if there's a partner in the picture, and saying, hey, honey, what are our values now?
Mm-hmm.
What are our goals now? They may be very different, and likely are very different than they were 10, 15, 20, 30 years earlier. And so that's why, to me, it's that beautiful space as well of saying, what do we want? How do we want to fill this next space of our lives? And do it with intention, not letting it be happenstance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But really seeing that this next stage of life can be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, well, what happened to me is I was a coach. I started coaching right when my sons were younger, and or I think maybe my first son was born, and I coached a gentleman who said, "I don't. My daughter's left for college, and I don't know what to do with my wife. Like we have been two parallel folks. I don't know if they're parallel or divergent, but they weren't here." And they weren't enmeshed. They were just two people who were like COO and CEO. They were just both basically attending soccer matches, but they didn't do dates. He's like, I don't even know my wife anymore. I
Mhm.
don't know what to say to her. I don't know what to do to make her happy. Like we've grown so far apart. And so in that case, um, I came up with some. I wish I knew that you had existed, and I would have just sent him to you. However, I sent him. You came. Unfortunately, the guy came to me when I didn't have a lot of life experience with this. But I still don't have a lot of life experience because I haven't. Like, what do parent couples do who they're divergent or running parallel? How do they just go to couples counseling? How do they get back on track?
That's a really good question, CJ. And part of it really first requires each person, and sometimes both partners aren't willing to do this. But if you want the marriage, the partnership, whatever it is, to last, it truly requires both people to go inward, to figure out what they want for themselves, their own goals. Their own goals. How do you want to unfold and blossom for these next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of your life? So that's the first thing. Each person has to accrue more self-knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and the beautiful part is if you're doing this in tandem and you're sharing it as you're figuring it out, guess what's happening? You're
Right.
getting to know the other person because you're sharing it. Hey, honey, I was writing out this and I realized that, I want to make jam. I want to
Right.
grow olives, whatever it is. I want to volunteer. So you're learning about the other person. And then when you share this and find out that there will be similarities
Mm-hmm.
somewhere, whether it's travel, whether it's volunteering, whether it's, you'll find that there are similarities generally if the people aren't too disparate, right?
Well,
But
there's certain people who, like, I talked to a client who's like, when my daughter leaves, I'm getting divorced. Like, it's like it's gone past the point of like, let's even have that conversation. And a lot of parents that just get divorced because they're like so far apart. I mean, do you have any advice or wisdom of parents who are like, should we stay or I mean, they're at that like tipping point where could they stay or break up? I mean, is there a way to think about this?
I think, CJ, that again, the self awareness piece is big. And here's why. Because if people say, hey, I just want to leave the marriage, I'm done, and they haven't had conversations with themselves or their partners, they're really short shrifting
Mm,
themselves and the relationship.
mm,
And that's the other thing that I get a little irritated with is people who go out and have affairs
mm-hmm.
thinking that that's the answer. Well, yeah, you may get some great sex and some surges in hormones and all of that, but you're still not taking care of the issue. You're
Right.
not taking care of the issue. And when we don't take care of our issues, as well as unless being, unfaithful is part of your moral compass, then you're also working against your moral compass.
Right.
So I really think that for couples who feel like they're at odds with each other, that it's always a wise decision to go to therapy
Mm-hmm.
of some sort, whether you seek spiritual counsel, whether you do, a couples workshop, whether you see a psychotherapist, do bibliotherapy. But that which we don't come to understand about ourselves and why a relationship has gone wrong is something that we've not taken the time to find out what's underneath the rock.
Yeah.
And then I would say to people, and then if you go to therapy and find that, or engage in some sort of self work, and you find that you're just too at odds, that you care about each other, that you might still love each other, but you don't necessarily like each other, which is a big thing. You can love someone and not really, like when I tell my husband, I'll say, I like you. To me, it's like the highest compliment I can give someone because that's what I sensed when you were talking about your son, the first one. You like him, you
Right.
love him, but you like him. I
Right.
mean, you really like him. And so for me, many couples do not like each other. They've
Oh.
come to a point where there
Yes,
is
that's
so
this woman's like, I just cannot be with him anymore. He's so critical and I just can't take it. And we've gone to therapy and I'm just like, I'm out. Like I've decided I'm out. I'm like, okay. Like I'm not doing couples counseling with her, but I'm like, all right, sounds like she's decided. But I think it would be different if okay, so my husband and I have been doing this for the last 4 years because I've been thinking about my son leaving for 2 years before he actually left,
Mhm.
and thinking, and mostly because I saw girlfriends, they felt like they were shattered, like after their kids left, and I couldn't figure out what that shattered feeling was. So I kind of threw myself in the empty nest before it even occurred. This is just how my mind works. Okay, so I threw myself and thought, okay, well, what does my livelihood want to look like? And so I worked full time, I worked part time, and I figured it out. And then throughout those conversations, I was like, you know what, I don't want to work full time. And I said, but what do you want, honey? Do you want to work full time? I'm just trying to like adjust my expectations. Do you want to go work full time or not? And he's like, I don't want to do that either. I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Like, then I did some like nonprofit board work. I'm like, I don't want to do this. Are you like, what do you want to do? Like, so we were having these conversations, And so it's like a lot of tiny slices over a course of 4 years versus like this kind of knockdown, drag out, like introspection. But I hope to do the introspective pieces um, during my next. I'm literally
Mhm.
taking a month off to some with my husband, 1 week with my husband, 3 weeks with myself, to answer exactly that question, like what do I want right now? Like what do I want right now? And it's interesting because as I've been contemplating this over the last 4 years, what I wanted when I was, at Microsoft working and trying to, not like just learn, grow, and like, feel like I was like learning and growing career wise. I don't really have that much interest in that anymore. I also don't want to like do anything with children. Like I don't feel like, oh, I'm going to be a nanny because I still want to be like that's not of any interest. But it's like, but what do I want? And it's a question that we never have the luxury to really think about what we want. And I mean, I know some things that I want and some things that I don't. But I don't know how when people go through this introspection, what are some of the critical questions that they should be asking themselves during this period?
So CJ, have you made it through much of Joy from Fear?
No, I'm sorry. I've been too busy
Oh,
packing, so
no
apologies.
worries, no worries. So all I was going to say is it takes you through that.
Ah.
And the reason that I did the book the way that I did is it helps you evolve. It helps you find the questions.
Mm-hmm.
It helps you. One of the things
Mm,
that really resonates with people, and it because it really builds on a foundation, is that toward the beginning of the book, I offer what I called wisdom tips in the book, right?
mm-hmm.
And one of them is to write a letter of regret to yourself.
Mm,
And people say, well, why a letter to regret? Well, then the next exercise takes you in a different direction. But sometimes it is only as a result of looking at what we wish we had done
mm,
that we begin to start
mm,
realizing that we can actually let go of a lot of those regrets.
mm,
For example, a woman
mm,
who didn't have a child, who now says, well, if I had had a child or 5 kids, I wouldn't have done this amount of travel or this or this. So that maybe if she still has that unrequited sense of wanting a child, maybe that is the doorway
mm-hmm.
that's saying, volunteer at a children's
Mm-hmm.
center, something like that. So the evolution through Joy from Fear, I'm sorry, I'm calling it's my first book, Joy from Fear, Aging Joyfully. The evolution of aging joyfully helps a woman and a man, if a man wants to read it, helps you come to understand all of those little pieces of yourself that were fragmented or put off, and you get to start collecting them and
Mm,
coming to know them and coming to embrace them. And the ones that make you feel good and fuller, then you're creating more of those through the
mm-hmm.
exercises. The ones that are holding you back, such as guilt, shame, those kind of things, shoulding, I should have done this, those
Right.
get left behind you.
Ah, okay.
And it is through that process that we become more and more aware. Okay, fine, I've done this. Some of it I'm proud of, some of it not so proud of. And this hasn't served me, but this has. So let's do more of that which feels good, less of that which doesn't, more of that which we wish we had done but haven't done, and let's continue on our way. And as we do that, we evolve as human beings
Mm-hmm.
because all we're doing is finding out what is our passion. What
Right.
is this next role? And when we breathe into, first, some people don't even know what their passion is. But as you come to know your passion, and I give case studies in the book, like about a woman who couldn't think of anything she liked to do at all
Mm-hmm.
and started picking up trash on her walks and was like, this is really cool. I'm getting a high out of picking
Right.
up trash, right?
Right. Right.
And so as we learn to look at the little signs,
Mm-hmm.
because again, as you said, you were in so many years of self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time to do it a different way.
Mm,
Now it's time to turn down the self-sacrifice voice and turn up the voice that says, what feels good to me? Let's do more of it. What doesn't feel good to me? Let's do less of it. And that's not selfish, because I can almost hear some women saying, oh, but that sounds so selfish. Oh, no, 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 no. It's the opposite of selfish. Because when we show up more in our skin as who we are meant to be, then we radiate joy, which is why it's called aging joyfully. And then we radiate not only for ourselves and our partners if we have one, but for the world. We become these gorgeous, radiant creatures that are showing this is what
Mm-hmm.
happens
Mm.
when you walk your talk.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happens when you embrace your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
comes with wrinkles. Yeah, it comes with this. Yeah, it comes with that. But hey, would I trade any of that to be 20 again? No.
Right. Right. Yeah, I get it. I mean, I feel like it's the micro slicing. It's you keep on trying something, don't like it, find out what you like, what you don't like, let go of. I think of it as recapitulation, where it's like you're letting go of what doesn't serve you and move forward to the things that bring you joy. For me, it's move more towards things that feel fun, meaningful, and give me freedom. And if those things are to live, to love, to learn, those are kind of like my litmus test. And if it's not those three things, then I'm just cutting it off, moving
Hmm.
forward, etc. So, one of the questions that we got from Jim is, I think he was referring to my 1 week, my week with my husband and 3 weeks for myself, and he said, "Isn't that kind of greedy?" And which I understand. Like, it's my husband is actually, just don't worry. My husband is going on a meditation retreat. He's doing the things he wants to do, and I'm doing the things that I want to do. So I don't know if it's greedy. It's just what it is. I don't
Well,
view
I
it as
like
greedy.
that question. I really like that question. Is it greedy? And I would say that, it's that idea. Some people think of self-care as greedy. And to me, when we take time, whether it's 3 weeks, some people need 3 months or 3 days, whatever it is, to really know more about ourselves and what we want to do with our time, to me, that is one of the most selfless acts we can do.
And how is it selfless? Because it's so self-absorbed, thinking about yourself.
Okay. Um, if, let's imagine that I go through my life and don't take time for myself, put my head down, hunker down, and model for my sons, and this is a true story, about what it looks like to be a woman who gives everything to everybody else and nothing to herself.
Hmm.
I am the model of self-sacrifice.
Hmm.
And then I turn around and tell my children, never take time for myself, not 3 days, much less 3 weeks. And that what would happen then if that woman becomes so tired, so anxious, so stressed, and a poor model to her children and her husband, that she's not really good for anything. She's like a drone. She's a robot.
Hmm.
Okay, now let's take in that woman. Yeah, she's definitely productive. She might spend 20 years or an entire lifetime doing that, and the world doesn't really need drones.
Hmm.
Now let's take that same woman and give her 3 weeks off every single year.
Hmm.
3 days off every single year, whatever it is that lets her be alive. Now she's more productive. She's more alert. She's happier. She's a better role model. Her children are happier. Her husband's happier. Her partner, whatever. She's, better at work, better at play, more invigorated, feels good, not consuming healthcare resources because of her depression and anxiety. I don't know. Doesn't sound very unhealthy to me.
Right.
It sounds very, yes.
So it's not selfish, it's selfless, because when you do this investment in yourself, you're able to give actually even more in a kind of more radiant way versus giving in a should, have to, must, guilty, shameful way, which I think is when people are self sacrifice. I'm speaking from my own experience. When you use the "what if a mom did that," I just pictured myself in that place, and
Absolutely.
I'll tell you what happens. I'll tell you what happens. Here's the downside of what happens: is you raise a son who you see doing that with other people, because that's what he thinks is supposed to
Absolutely.
do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a night. I literally can see he learned this from me, and it's awful because when I see him doing it, it just makes me very unhappy. And so, why am I doing this? It's not good.
Absolutely, CJ. And the other side to it is often the person who really is of service to others in an unbalanced way
Hmm.
attracts the truly greedy person. So then we raise the children because we've modeled being, doormats. We raise the children who attract the people who have narcissistic energy,
Oh
right?
gosh.
And so we've actually created a child who attracts somebody who is truly greedy, who wants to be
Oh,
taken
right.
care of, who doesn't want to work, and so to me, that definition of greed and selfish, there are people who, let's say, don't take time off. And I know some people like this, but their time is spent in rapacious activities designed to line their own pockets,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so it's not about the amount of time off, it's about what do you do with your time? Is
Right.
your time spent well, as you say, creating something, we all have our own words for it, right? But for me, it's about learning joy, peace, serenity, kindness, compassion, tenderness. And if I can do better at that by taking a little bit of time off. I'm not great at taking time off, but if I can do better at that and be more aligned with that by taking some time off, more power to me.
Mhm.
And again, but if you're somebody who's really greedy and truly greedy and not working hard or not tending to your family, and, you know, to me, it's greed is very interesting. We have to
Mhm.
look at what is our intention. Are we just feeding the self, or are we taking care of the self so that we can contribute to the world and our
Right. Yes.
responsibilities?
Yes. I see what you're saying. So are we just being like, oh, I'm just getting massage, I'm doing this, and I'm doing all these self-indulgent, and that could be self-care, or it could be running away from actually facing whatever you need to face. And so I kind of just depends on what I'm hearing you say is just the intention that you're going about
Absolutely.
ways. All right, so we've talked a lot about parents. I want to talk a little bit about people who don't have, because you have a couple things in your book about people who decide not to have children, and you mentioned it early, or what happens for people in their 50s if they don't have children? I mean, what's the scenario?
I work with a lot of women who chose or weren't able to have children, and men as well. And for those people, it takes a variety of forms. I have one client who has a horse,
Hmm.
and her horse is the love of her life. She doesn't have a life partner, and she loves her horse.
Mm.
And so she's really invested in that. For other people, they find that they're at a space now that career is winding down, and
Mm.
62 or 65 is approaching. They're saying, now what?
Mm.
Uh-oh.
With
And I
their
have a
retirement, you're saying like they're thinking
yeah,
about retirement.
yes. And I have I'm thinking of a client. I have a male client who's at a place where he's really struggling. He says, I made all of these choices that were really egocentric throughout my earlier years. And now all of those choices have left me starkly, madly alone.
Mm.
And he's looking, and so the patterns, he's really hardwired. Now he's actually at a point where he's afraid of relationships, and that, so he's looking at aging alone, and he doesn't like it. He doesn't.
Ah.
So that aloneness paid off when he was a freewheeling bachelor at a younger age, and it's not paying off very well because now he doesn't have somebody to take trips with, and all those, doesn't have children. And so but it's not that way for all clients. For some clients I have who were like, I'm thinking of a woman who was in partnership for a long time, didn't have children, partner was unfaithful to her, his mistake, and she called the relationship off even after, they were together for 20 years. She's having the time of her life. She is really reconnecting with girlfriends, reconnecting with herself, doing some trips that she had put off for a long time. And she is just having the most I'm watching her evolve before my eyes.
Mm.
So I think it really depends on the person. And if you are willing, if you found yourself in a box that you have created through life, if you're willing to break out of that to create a new life, if you're unhappy in that box. Some people
Mhm.
are happy in their boxes.
Right.
And I see that sadly with some people who have created boxes out of relationships with alcohol or spending or substances, and they are too afraid to leave that box. And
Mm.
for the people who aren't afraid to leave boxes they've created, then the world is their oyster. And they can
Mm.
just begin to do the work to take off the shackles and the chains and figure out who they are and what they want.
Who puts these? I mean, so they're self-imposed shackles and chains and boxes because they make us feel safe, is what you're saying, right? So I'll stay with my husband even though he's an alcoholic, or I will, you know. So, how does? What are the ways to start pushing the little edges of those things, just for people who may be in those boxes or chains? What are some questions that you may want to ask, have them contemplate?
One of them is really decide what you want. And so it's not really a question, it's more an attitude.
Mm,
Is I guess it is a question. Ask yourself what you want.
mm-hmm,
And if the cost of, so let's say the woman who has the alcoholic husband and she doesn't know what to do. Look at the relationship, look at where you are without judgment, but with pure honesty. And you might say, hey, I can't afford a home or to set up a new life on my own. So I'm going to stay. I'm
mm,
going to stay with conscious awareness and I'm going to accept that this is my decision.
mm,
And I am going to live and do the best with my decision. I'm going to stop fighting it. I'm going to be in that place of acceptance.
mm.
That's one choice, to accept, to stay and make the best of it. And more power to you if that is what your decision is. Another woman may say, hey, I have the wherewithal, financially, physically, emotionally, whatever it is, to leave. I've given him 30 chances. He's not changing. I do not want to die this way.
Mhm.
So for her, she's going to make the decision to leave or have him leave, whatever way it works, and move on with her life. Third choice, which is the one I don't recommend, is staying in that situation with your head in the sand and letting yourself be mired in anxiety and
Mm,
depression.
mm,
So we get the shackles, sometimes from childhood patterns that we
mm,
learn and they become
mhm,
ingrained. Some of them are results of making not so great life decisions, choosing a partner that wasn't right,
mhm,
or choosing a partner we thought was right, and it turns out he or she wasn't right, right? But really being able to look at this period and start to evaluate it. And again, Aging Joyfully gives the exercises to slow it down, to figure out so that you don't feel alone.
Okay, we've been talking to Carla Marie Manly. We have actually more questions coming on. This is a hot topic. Aging Joyfully, a woman's and man's guide to optimal health, relationships, and fulfillment for 50s and beyond. Thank you so much. We're going to have you come on again. Questions are coming abounding on the screen. Thank you so much.
It has been such a pleasure. Have a beautiful journey as you evolve and learn and explore and let go and bring in newness.
Thank
So
you.
happy for you.
Thank you.
And thanks to your listeners. It's been a pleasure, CJ. Thank you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.